Imagine being publicly shamed as a corporate failure at your rehearsal dinner, only for your groom's billionaire boss to crash your wedding, bow, and reveal you're a CEO worth $50 million. What chaos unfolds next? You have to hear this. Thank you, Eliza, for this chance to share. It's liberating to recount how I transformed humiliation into empowerment, standing tall for my true self. My name is Isabella Romano, and this is the story of how I went from being called the family disgrace to discovering my true worth on what was supposed to be my wedding day. At 38, I thought I had finally found my place in a world that had never quite known what to do with me. Born and raised in California to Spanish immigrant parents who built their American dream one restaurant at a time, I had always been the daughter who didn't quite fit the mold they had cast for success. My sharp black bob framed a face that had learned to smile through years of subtle dismissals, and my dark brown eyes had grown tired of searching for approval in rooms that would never offer it. I was marrying Mark Henderson, a junior logistics coordinator at Finch Technologies, one of the most prestigious tech companies in Silicon Valley. To my family, Mark represented everything I had failed to achieve: respectability, stability, and most importantly, their approval. For 2 decades, I had been the family disappointment. While my younger sister Sophia sailed through medical school and married a prominent surgeon, I had chosen the unpredictable world of tech startups. My parents, Eduardo and Carmen Romano, had sacrificed everything to build their restaurant empire from a single food truck, and they couldn't understand why their eldest daughter insisted on chasing what they called computer fantasies, instead of settling down properly like a good American daughter should. What they didn't know was that my latest computer fantasy was about to change everything. For the past 3 years, I had been developing data-mined analytics, a revolutionary platform that could predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy. The technology was so advanced that several major corporations had been circling like sharks, eager to acquire it. The most persistent suitor was Finch Technologies, the very company where my fiancé worked in the basement logistics department, sorting packages while remaining blissfully unaware that his future wife was negotiating with his legendary CEO for a deal worth $50 million. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Mark organized shipping manifests on the 3rd floor, I was conducting encrypted video calls with Alistair Finch himself. Mark had no idea about my company's true value, and I had deliberately kept it that way. After years of being dismissed by my family, I had learned to keep my achievements close to my chest, sharing only the minimum details necessary to explain my work. When Mark asked about my business, I spoke vaguely about consulting and analytics work, letting him assume I was struggling to make ends meet with freelance projects. It was easier than explaining complex algorithms to someone who showed more interest in weekend football games than in understanding what I actually did for a living. The wedding planning had been an exercise in surrender, each decision a small death of my authentic self. My mother insisted on the St. Regis ballroom, complete with crystal chandeliers that cost more per night than most people's annual salaries and enough white roses to supply a small funeral home. The scent of those roses would follow me through every fitting, every tasting, every moment of preparation, until I began to associate the smell with my own suffocation. Sophia, as my maid of honor, had convinced me to abandon my preferred sleek aesthetic for a princess gown that made me feel like I was playing dress-up in someone else's dream. The dress alone cost $8,000, money I paid from my business account, while my family assumed Mark was covering the expenses. "You need to look softer, Isabella," my mother had said during one of the endless fittings, adjusting the layers of satin and tulle that seemed designed to hide every sharp edge of my personality. "Men don't like women who look too intimidating." I had nodded and smiled, even as every fiber of my being rebelled against the costume they were forcing me into. This wedding wasn't about me, it was about their vision of who I should be. I was funding their fantasy with money earned from the very work they dismissed as a hobby. The guest list had been another battlefield I had lost. Somehow, my closest friends from the tech world had been excluded due to space constraints, while distant relatives who barely knew my middle name filled the seats. When I protested, Mark had squeezed my hand with that patronizing smile I was beginning to recognize as his default response to any conflict. "Don't make waves, Izzy. It's just one day, and then we can get back to normal. Normal. As if there was anything normal about paying $50,000 for your own humiliation while pretending to be grateful for the privilege. As if normal meant pretending to be smaller than you actually were so everyone else could feel comfortable. The irony was that I could afford this elaborate wedding 10 times over, but I was paying for it while playing the role of the grateful daughter who should be thankful that anyone wanted to marry her at all. Every vendor payment, every deposit, every upgrade came from data-mined analytics' healthy bank account, funded by clients who valued my expertise at rates that would have shocked my family into silence. The rehearsal dinner was held at my family's flagship restaurant, Romano's, the crown jewel of their empire, and a testament to what immigrants could build with determination and sacrifice. The private dining room was filled with the warm glow of candlelight and the sound of forced laughter, the kind that comes when people are trying too hard to prove they're having a good time. I sat at the head table in a burgundy dress my sister had chosen, watching my family perform their version of happiness for Mark's relatives and colleagues. The dress felt like another costume, another layer of the person they wanted me to be rather than the woman I actually was. My father, Eduardo Romano, was in his element. At 65, he still commanded every room he entered, his presence both warm and intimidating in the way that only successful patriarchs could manage. He had built his restaurant empire from a single food truck, working 18-hour days and saving every penny until he could afford a small storefront, then another, then another. He wore his success like armor, polished to a brilliant shine for occasions like this. Tonight, that armor gleamed as he prepared to address the room, and I felt a familiar mixture of pride and dread watching him rise from his seat. When he stood to give his toast, the conversations died away like someone had turned down the volume on the entire room. Every face turned toward him with the reverence reserved for patriarchs and kings, the kind of automatic respect that came from knowing you were in the presence of someone who had built something lasting. He raised his wine glass, and the crystal caught the light like a prism, sending tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. Tonight, we celebrate not just a wedding, but the joining of two families, he began, his voice carrying the slight accent that became more pronounced when he was emotional. I want to toast my daughters, both of them, as they have shaped our family in their own ways. He turned to Sophia first, his face radiating the kind of pride that made my chest ache with longing. To Sophia, our brilliant doctor, who graduated top of her class from Stanford Medical and married the wonderful Dr. Martinez. She has brought nothing but honor to our family name. The room erupted in applause so enthusiastic it felt like a standing ovation. Sophia blushed prettily, her perfect smile gleaming under the chandelier light. She looked every inch the successful daughter in her designer dress, her long dark hair styled in elegant waves that had probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Then my father's gaze shifted to me, and something cold flickered in his eyes, like clouds passing over the sun. The room seemed to hold its breath as he raised his glass higher, and I felt my stomach drop as if I were in an elevator that had suddenly plummeted. And to my other daughter, the corporate failure. The words hit me like a physical blow, each syllable landing with the force of a slap. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him, that my own insecurities had somehow distorted his words into something cruel. But the laughter that followed confirmed the nightmare was real. It wasn't gentle chuckling or nervous titters. It was full-throated laughter, the kind reserved for particularly good jokes, the kind that said everyone was in on something except the target. I felt my face burn with humiliation as I looked around the table, cataloging each person who found my public degradation amusing. Mark's colleagues were laughing, the same people who worked in the building where I was negotiating million-dollar deals. My extended family was laughing, aunts and uncles who had spent years asking when I was going to get a real job. Even some of Mark's family members had joined in, though they looked slightly uncomfortable, like people who had accidentally walked into someone else's private moment. My sister had the decency to look shocked, her perfect composure cracking for just a moment, but she said nothing, not one word in my defense. I turned to Mark, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird, silently begging him to say something. Anything. To defend me, to tell them they were wrong, to show even a shred of the loyalty a future husband should have for his wife. Instead, he gave me a tight, uncomfortable smile and leaned close to whisper, "He's just being old-fashioned, babe. You know how he is. Let it go." let it go. As if my father's public humiliation was just a quirky personality trait I should learn to tolerate. As if the years I had spent building something meaningful were just an embarrassing phase that everyone could laugh about over dinner. As if my pain was less important than avoiding an uncomfortable conversation. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it crystallized. The hurt transformed into something harder, clearer, and infinitely more dangerous. I smiled politely and raised my own glass, playing the part they expected while my mind began to work with laser focus. To family, I said simply, and drank. The wine tasted like ash in my mouth, but I swallowed it down along with the last remnants of my need for their approval. The conversation moved on, but I remained frozen in that moment of clarity. These people didn't love me, they tolerated me. Mark didn't respect me, he pitied me. And tomorrow, I was supposed to promise to honor and cherish a man who couldn't even be bothered to defend me when his future father-in-law called me a failure in front of 50 people. But here's what none of them knew. While they were laughing at the corporate failure, that failure was sitting on the biggest deal of her career. 3 weeks ago, I had submitted my final counteroffer to Finch Technologies. $50 million for data-mined analytics, with the condition that I would remain as CEO of the newly formed Advanced Analytics Division. It was an audacious demand, but my technology was worth it, and I had the client testimonials and revenue projections to prove it. The negotiations had been intense, conducted through encrypted emails and secure video calls with Alistair Finch himself. The man was a legend in Silicon Valley, known for his reclusive nature and his ability to spot revolutionary technology before anyone else. He had built Finch Technologies from a garage startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire, and he was notorious for his direct, no-nonsense approach to business. Our final video call had been 3 days ago, and I could still remember every detail with perfect clarity. Finch had leaned back in his chair, his steel-gray eyes studying me through the screen with the intensity of a chess master contemplating his next move. "Ms. Romano, your technology is impressive, and your terms are ambitious. We'll need time to consider." "Of course, Mr. Finch, take all the time you need, but I should mention that I have other interested parties." It was a calculated bluff. While other companies had shown interest, none had come close to Finch's offer. But Finch didn't need to know that, and my poker face had been perfected through years of family dinners where showing weakness was blood in the water. "I see. And when do you need an answer?" "I'll be attending a family event this weekend. If you could have an answer by then, I would appreciate it." Something had shifted in his expression then, a flicker of curiosity that suggested he was reading between the lines. "What kind of family event?" "My wedding, actually." "Congratulations. I hope it's everything you're hoping for." There had been something in his tone that suggested he understood it might not be, a knowing quality that made me suspect he had his own experience with family expectations and personal authenticity. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. I'll be waiting for your decision." Now, sitting in this restaurant surrounded by people who thought my life's work was a joke, I made a decision that would change everything. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed some air, and stepped outside into the cool evening. The city lights sparkled below us, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe without the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on my chest. I pulled out my phone and composed an email to Alistair Finch's private address, the one he had given me for urgent communications. My fingers flew over the screen with steady precision, each word chosen with the care of someone placing dynamite. "Mr. Finch, I accept your original offer with one additional condition. The final agreement must be delivered to me in person tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the St. Regis Hotel Ballroom. I realize this is an unusual request, but I assure you it's necessary. If this condition cannot be met, I will accept the offer from your competitors on Monday. Best regards, Isabella Romano." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. It was the most audacious power move of my career, demanding that a billionaire CEO personally deliver a contract to my wedding. But something told me that Alistair Finch would appreciate the boldness, even if he didn't agree to it. My phone buzzed within minutes. A single-line response. "It will be my pleasure, Ms. Romano. See you tomorrow." I stared at the message, hardly believing what I was reading. He had agreed. Alistair Finch, the most powerful man in Silicon Valley, would be attending my wedding. Not as a guest, but as my business partner. The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect California day that made everything look like a movie set. I woke up in my childhood bedroom for the last time, surrounded by the remnants of the girl I used to be. My old academic awards lined the dresser, gathering dust beside photos of family vacations where I always seemed to be standing slightly apart from the group, as if even then I knew I didn't quite belong. Mark was already gone, having left early for his bachelor breakfast with his groomsmen. He had kissed my forehead before leaving, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like a pat on the head than an expression of love. "See you at the altar, Mrs. Henderson," he had whispered, and I had forced myself to smile. Mrs. Henderson. The name felt foreign on my tongue, like wearing someone else's shoes, but in a few hours, it wouldn't matter what anyone called me. I would have a new title that actually meant something. Sophia burst into my room at 8 a.m., followed by my mother and a parade of hair and makeup artists who descended on me like a pit crew preparing a race car. The transformation began immediately, turning my sharp, professional appearance into something softer and more traditionally feminine. They tamed my black bob into loose curls that felt like a betrayal of my usual sleek style, applied layers of makeup to create a glowing bride effect that made me look like a stranger, and squeezed me into the elaborate white gown that made me feel like a child playing dress-up in her mother's closet. "You look beautiful, Mija," my mother said, tears in her eyes as she fastened the pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. The pearls felt heavy against my throat, like a collar marking my submission to tradition. Like a real bride, as opposed to what? The successful businesswoman I actually was. But I smiled and thanked her, playing my part in their fantasy while counting down the hours until everything would change. The St. Regis ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland of white roses and crystal, exactly as my mother had envisioned. 300 guests filled the seats, all of them dressed in their finest clothes, ready to witness what they thought would be my transformation from family disappointment to respectable wife. I stood in the bridal suite, looking at myself in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me was beautiful in a conventional way, but she wasn't me. The real Isabella Romano had been buried under layers of tulle and expectation, hidden behind a smile that felt painted on. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Package will be delivered as requested." AF, my heart rate spiked. He was really going to do it. In less than 2 hours, Alistair Finch would walk into my wedding and change everything. I quickly deleted the message and slipped the phone back into my purse, my hands trembling slightly with anticipation and terror. "Isabella, it's time," my father announced from the doorway. He looked distinguished in his black tuxedo, every inch the successful patriarch who had built an empire from nothing. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something that might have been pride in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual reserved approval. "You look acceptable," he said, which was the closest thing to a compliment I had received from him in years. The processional music began, and I watched through the doorway as Sophia glided down the aisle, her smile radiant as she took her place at the altar. She looked perfect, as always, the daughter who had never caused a moment's worry or disappointment. Then the wedding march started, and it was my turn. The music felt like a funeral dirge, each note marking another step toward the burial of my authentic self. My father offered me his arm, and we began the long walk down the aisle. The ballroom was packed with 300 guests, all of them turning to watch my grand entrance. I recognized faces from both families, Mark's colleagues who had no idea they were about to witness their CEO crash a wedding, and various business associates my parents had insisted on inviting to show off their successful daughter's respectable marriage. Mark stood at the altar in his rented tuxedo, beaming with what I had once thought was love, but now recognized as satisfaction. He looked like a man who had won a prize, not someone about to pledge his life to another person. Behind him stood his groomsmen, including several of his colleagues from Finch Technologies, who were about to get the shock of their professional lives. I walked slowly, my eyes scanning the crowd and landing on an empty chair in the back corner that had been reserved for a last-minute addition to the guest list. A chair that would very soon be occupied by the most powerful man in Silicon Valley. We reached the altar, and my father placed my hand in Mark's with a formal nod that felt more like a business transaction than a gesture of love. Mark squeezed my fingers, his palms slightly sweaty with nerves, and I wondered if he was nervous about the ceremony or about something deeper he couldn't quite name. The officiant, a friend of my father's from their country club, began the ceremony with the traditional opening. "Dearly beloved, We are gathered here today to witness the union of Isabella Romano and Mark Henderson in holy matrimony. I stood there, holding my bouquet of white roses, and tried to look like a happy bride while my heart hammered against my ribs. Any minute now, everything would change. Any minute now, the truth would come out, and everyone in this room would discover exactly what kind of failure I really was. The officiant droned on about love and commitment while I stared at the massive ballroom doors, waiting. Mark began his vows, his voice steady and sincere as he recited the words we had practiced a dozen times. Isabella, from the moment I met you, I knew you were special. You're kind, loyal, and you've always supported me in my career. I promise to protect you, to provide for you, and to love you for all the days of my life. Protect me, provide for me, as if I were some helpless creature who needed his care rather than a woman who had built a multi-million-dollar company while he sorted packages in a basement. The irony was almost too much to bear, but I maintained my serene smile and prepared to recite my own vows. Mark, you've shown me what it means to be part of a team. You've accepted me as I am, and you've never asked me to be anything other than myself. The lies came easily, polished smooth by weeks of practice, but even as I spoke them, I knew they would be the last lies I ever told to please someone else. The words felt like ash in my mouth, each syllable a betrayal of the woman I actually was. Do you, Isabella Romano, take Mark Henderson to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part? I opened my mouth to say, I do. The words that would seal my fate and transform me into the woman my family wanted me to be. The phrase was right there, waiting on my tongue, ready to complete this elaborate performance. But before I could speak, the massive ballroom doors swung open with a sound that echoed through the silent room like a thunderclap. Every head turned toward the entrance, 300 people moving in perfect unison like a choreographed dance. There, silhouetted against the bright light of the corridor, stood a figure that commanded immediate attention. He was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and an aura of unmistakable authority that seemed to fill the entire space. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking who he was. Alistair Finch had arrived. The silence that followed was absolute and electric. You could have heard a pin drop in the cavernous ballroom as 300 guests turned in their seats, craning their necks to see the legendary CEO who had just interrupted the most important moment of the ceremony. I could hear the sharp intake of breath from my mother, the confused murmur from Mark's family, and the barely contained excitement from the tech industry professionals who recognized him immediately. Finch stood in the doorway for a moment, his steel-gray eyes scanning the room with the calm assessment of a man accustomed to commanding attention wherever he went. He was exactly as I had imagined him from our video calls, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, and radiating the kind of quiet power that comes from building an empire from nothing. Mark's face had gone pale, his mouth hanging slightly open as he stared at his boss's boss's boss. "Mr. Finch?" he whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Sir, what an honor, I had no idea you were. I didn't know you would be." But Finch wasn't looking at Mark. His gaze had locked onto mine, and I saw something in his eyes that I had learned to recognize in our business negotiations: respect. Finch began walking down the aisle with measured steps, his presence parting the sea of guests who instinctively leaned away from the power, radiating off him like heat from a fire. My father had risen from his seat, his face a mixture of confusion and automatic deference to obvious wealth and status. My mother clutched her pearls, probably wondering if she should be honored or mortified that such an important man had crashed her daughter's wedding. "Sir," Mark continued, his voice getting higher with each word, "this is such an incredible surprise. To have you here at my wedding. Isabella, can you believe this? Mr. Finch himself came to our wedding." Finch reached the altar and stopped directly in front of me, completely ignoring Mark's babbling. The officiant had stepped back, clearly unsure of the protocol for handling billionaire wedding crashers. The entire ballroom held its breath as one of the most powerful men in the world stood facing the bride. Then, to the absolute shock of everyone present, Alistair Finch gave a short, formal bow. Not a casual nod or a polite incline of the head, but a bow that conveyed genuine respect from one equal to another. "Ms. Romano," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. The formal address hit the room like a thunderclap. Mark's confident smile faltered as confusion flickered across his face. "Ms. Romano," he repeated. "Sir, this is my fiancée, Isabella Henderson. Well, she will be in about 2 minutes." Finch's eyes never left mine as he reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather portfolio. The movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial, as he opened it to reveal a thick contract bound in midnight blue. "Ms. Romano," he said again, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "we accept your $50 million counteroffer." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The phrase $50 million seemed to echo off the crystal chandeliers and marble floors, bouncing around the ballroom until it filled every corner of the space. Then the gasps began, first from my mother, then spreading through the crowd like wildfire. I heard someone's wine glass shatter against the floor. Mark's best man let out a strangled sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Mark himself looked like he had been struck by lightning. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as the implications began to sink in. "50 million?" he whispered. "What are you talking about? This is my fiancée, Isabella. She works in. She does some kind of computer thing." Finch finally glanced at Mark, and the look he gave him was one of mild pity mixed with professional assessment. "Son, you work in third-floor logistics, correct? Package sorting and inventory management?" "Yes, sir, but..." Ms. Romano here is the founder and CEO of DataMind Analytics, the most innovative predictive analytics platform I've seen in 20 years. As of today, she's also the CEO of Finch Technologies' new advanced analytics division. He paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "I came here because Ms. Romano's final condition for the acquisition was that I deliver the acceptance in person, at the place where her value was most underestimated." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my father's face turning red as he processed what he had just heard, the same face he made when a restaurant critic gave him a bad review. My sister had gone pale, her perfect composure cracking as she stared at me in shock. My mother looked like she might faint, one hand pressed to her chest as if her heart might stop. But it was Mark's reaction that fascinated me most. He was staring at me as if I were a complete stranger, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "You're a CEO?" he managed to croak. "You own a company worth $50 million? "I do," I said simply, speaking for the first time since Finch had entered the ballroom. My voice was steady, clear, and carried none of the uncertainty that had plagued me for months. "I have for 3 years. But you never said. I thought you just did some freelance computer work." "You said you were struggling to make ends meet?" "I said I was investing everything back into my company. You assumed that meant I was broke." The truth was, I had been deliberately vague about my work. After years of having my achievements dismissed by my family, I had learned to downplay my success. Mark had never asked detailed questions about my business, content to assume that his steady paycheck made him the financial backbone of our relationship. Finch stepped forward and handed me the contract. "The terms are exactly as you specified, Ms. Romano. $50 million for the acquisition, plus a guaranteed 5-year contract as CEO of the new division, with full autonomy over hiring and strategic direction." I took the portfolio with steady hands, feeling the weight of it, not just the physical weight of the paper, but the weight of vindication. Of proof. Of everything I had worked for finally being recognized by someone who mattered. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. I accept." I turned to face the crowd, 300 pairs of eyes staring at me in various states of shock, awe, and disbelief. These were the same people who had laughed when my father called me a corporate failure less than 24 hours ago. Now they were looking at me like I was a completely different person. But I wasn't different. I was exactly the same woman I had always been. The only thing that had changed was their perception. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's acoustics, "I want to thank you all for coming to what I suppose you could call a launch party. The open bar will continue for another hour, courtesy of DataMind Analytics. Please enjoy the Shrimp Towers." I looked down at Mark, who was still standing at the altar looking shell-shocked. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled the engagement ring from my finger. The diamond caught the light from the chandeliers, sending tiny rainbows across the white roses. "Consider this your severance package," I said, pressing the ring into his palm. His fingers closed around it automatically, but his eyes never left my face. "Isabella, wait," he said, his voice desperate now. "We can work this out. I mean, this is incredible news. You're a millionaire. We can what, Mark?" Pretend that 5 minutes ago you weren't perfectly content to marry someone you thought was a struggling freelancer. Pretend that you would have defended me last night if you'd known I was worth $50 million. As Alistair Finch and I reached the ballroom doors, my father's voice boomed across the space with the same commanding tone he used to silence rowdy restaurant patrons. "Isabella, you stop right there." I paused, my hand on the ornate door handle, and turned back to face him. Eduardo Romano was striding down the aisle, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and something I had never seen before: uncertainty. Behind him, the entire wedding party and 300 guests watched like spectators at a tennis match. "You think you can just walk out of here?" he demanded, his accent thickening with emotion. "After everything we've done for you, after we paid for your education, supported you through your failures, gave you a beautiful wedding?" I let out a laugh that surprised even me with its bitterness. "Paid for my education? Papa, I had academic scholarships. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my living expenses. And this beautiful wedding? I paid for every single detail, from the flowers you chose to the band my mother insisted on, $50,000 from my company's accounts. That's not the point." He was close enough now that I could see the veins bulging in his neck. "The point is family. The point is respect. You don't embarrass your family in front of 300 people. The way you embarrassed me last night?" The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was past caring about his feelings. "When you called me a corporate failure in front of everyone, when you held up Sophia as the golden child and pointed at me like I was some kind of cautionary tale," my sister had followed him down the aisle, her rose gold dress rustling with each step. "Izzy, please," she said, her voice pleading. "Papa didn't mean it the way it sounded. He was just trying to be funny." "Funny?" I turned to face her, and she actually took a step back at whatever she saw in my expression. "You think it's funny to humiliate someone at their own rehearsal dinner? You think it's amusing to reduce someone's life work to a punchline?" No, of course not. But you know how Papa is. He doesn't understand your business world. To him, success means something tangible, something he can see and touch. Something like a restaurant empire built on immigrant determination and family recipes. I gestured toward my father. "You mean success like taking a single food truck and turning it into a chain worth $20 million. Because that's exactly what I did, Sophia. I took an idea and turned it into something worth $50 million. The only difference is that Papa built his empire with food, and I built mine with code." My father's eyes widened at the comparison. For the first time in my adult life, I saw him actually consider my words instead of dismissing them outright. $50 million, my mother whispered from her seat in the front row. "Dios mío, Isabella, $50 million? Yes, Mama, $50 million, plus a 5-year contract as CEO of a division at one of the most prestigious tech companies in the world." I looked around the room, making eye contact with relatives who had spent years asking when I was going to find a real job. "I've been running a successful company for 3 years. I have 12 employees, offices in 2 cities, and clients across 4 continents. But none of you ever asked about any of that." Mark had finally found his voice again. "Isabella, please, let's talk about this privately. We can work this out. I mean, this changes everything. We can have an amazing life together. We can travel, buy a house, start a family. Now that you know I'm rich," I said flatly, "now that you know I can provide the lifestyle you want, suddenly you're interested in working things out. That's not fair. I loved you before I knew about any of this." "Did you?" I challenged. "Because the woman you thought you loved was someone who needed your protection and financial support. Someone who would be grateful for your steady paycheck and your family's acceptance. That woman never existed, Mark. She was a role I was playing because I thought it would make people love me." Alistair Finch had been standing quietly beside me throughout this entire exchange, but now he cleared his throat. "If I may," he said, his voice cutting through the emotional chaos with professional precision. "I've been in business for 30 years, and I've learned to recognize talent regardless of the package it comes in. Ms. Romano didn't just build a successful company, she revolutionized an entire approach to data analysis. The fact that her own family was unaware of her achievements says more about your attention than it does about her communication." My father straightened, clearly uncomfortable with being lectured by a stranger, even one worth billions. "With respect, Mr. Finch, you don't understand our family dynamics. Isabella has always been difficult, independent to a fault. She never wanted our help or our advice. Because every time I tried to share my successes with you, you found ways to diminish them," I said. "When I got my first major client, you asked when I was going to get a real job." When I hired my first employee, you said I was getting ahead of myself. When I moved into actual office space, you worried I was spending money I didn't have. You never once asked to see my work or tried to understand what I was building. The truth was pouring out of me now, years of frustration and hurt finally finding their voice. Do you know why I never told Mark about the real value of my company? Because I learned from you that my achievements make people uncomfortable. I learned to make myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. Sophia stepped forward, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Izzy, I'm so sorry. I had no idea you felt that way. I thought you were happy with your little computer business. My little computer business employs 12 people and their families. My little computer business has revolutionized how 3 Fortune 500 companies predict market trends. My little computer business just sold for $50 million. I looked at her, this sister I had spent my whole life trying to measure up to. But you're right about one thing, it is little compared to what you've accomplished. After all, you married a surgeon. I just became a CEO. The sarcasm in my voice was unmistakable, and Sophia flinched as if I had slapped her. But I was past caring about protecting everyone else's feelings while my own were trampled. What do you want from us, Isabella? My father asked, and for the first time in my memory, he sounded defeated. What can we do to fix this? I looked at him, this man who had been the center of my universe for so long. This immigrant who had built something extraordinary through sheer force of will and determination. This father who had somehow failed to recognize those same qualities in his own daughter. I don't want anything from you, Papa. That's the point. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need your financial support, or your connections, or your permission to be successful. I've already done it on my own. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that follows a storm. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, applying the final touches of makeup that would transform me from a runaway bride into a Fortune 500 CEO. The woman looking back at me was familiar yet different, the same sharp black bob and dark brown eyes, but with a confidence that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than before. I chose my outfit with the precision of a general selecting armor for battle. A tailored charcoal suit that spoke of power without apology, heels that added authority to my already commanding presence, and jewelry that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. This was the real Isabella Romano, the woman I had always been beneath the layers of compromise and accommodation. The Finch Technologies headquarters occupied an entire city block, its glass and steel structure reaching toward the sky like a monument to innovation. As my car pulled up to the executive entrance, I felt a familiar surge of excitement that I recognized from my early days building data-mined analytics. This was the feeling of standing on the precipice of something transformative. Alistair Finch was waiting in the executive lobby, looking every inch the tech mogul in his impeccably tailored suit. "Ready for your first day, CEO Romano?" he asked, and I loved the sound of my new title. "More than ready," I replied, and I meant it. The executive boardroom was a temple to corporate power, with its massive mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. 12 senior executives were already seated, their faces displaying various degrees of curiosity and skepticism. I recognized the dynamic immediately. They were wondering if the new CEO was a legitimate visionary or just another acquisition casualty who would be quietly sidelined within 6 months. "Ladies and gentlemen," Finch began, "I'd like you to meet Isabella Romano, the founder of Data-Mined Analytics and your new CEO for the Advanced Analytics Division." For the next hour, I fielded questions that challenged me intellectually rather than personally. They wanted to understand my technology, my vision for integration, my plans for scaling the platform across multiple industries. No one asked when I was planning to settle down or whether I thought I could handle such a demanding role. They treated me like exactly what I was, a professional at the top of her field. The applications for healthcare alone could revolutionize patient care, observed Dr. Chen, the head of our medical technology division. Predictive analytics for treatment outcomes, early disease detection, resource allocation, the possibilities are endless. "That's exactly the kind of thinking I was hoping for," I said, clicking to the next slide in my presentation. Data-mined analytics isn't just about improving existing processes. It's about reimagining what's possible when we can predict patterns that human analysis might miss. After the formal presentation, Finch walked me to my new office, a corner suite with views of both the mountains and the ocean. The space was elegant and functional, designed for someone who made decisions that affected thousands of people and millions of dollars. "How does it feel?" he asked as I stood behind my new desk. "Like coming home," I said, and realized it was true. This felt more natural than any role I had ever played in my personal life. As I settled into my new life, I received a handwritten note from my mother. "Mija, your father and I would like to take you to dinner. Not to apologize, though we owe you many apologies, but to learn about the work you do. We want to understand the daughter we never took time to know. If you're willing to teach us, we're ready to listen." I had traded a wedding dress for a power suit, a life of compromise for a life of achievement, and a future of diminished expectations for unlimited possibilities. It was, without question, the best trade I had ever made. Isabella, thank you for your raw, inspiring story. It teaches us that hiding our achievements to avoid discomfort can backfire, but boldly claiming our worth like you did can shatter illusions and invite genuine respect. I'm Eliza Quinn, and remember, here on Wedding Day Justice, veils off, justice on.